You are listening to episode 36 of the EU Startups podcast. Today's guest is David Nothacker, the founder and CEO of Sennder, a German unicorn and Europe's #1 digital freight forwarder. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the EU Startups podcast. Before we jump into the interview with today's guest, I'm excited to introduce our podcast sponsor. This episode of the EU Startups podcast is brought to you by Vanta, helping you scale security practices and automate compliance for the industry's most sought-after standards. To close and grow major customers, you have to demonstrate trust, but providing your security and compliance can be time-consuming, tedious and expensive, especially for startups, unless you use Vanta. Vanta automates up to 90% of the work for the most sought-after compliance standards like SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and gets you audit-ready in weeks instead of months. With Vanta, you get up to 400 hours of your time back and reach up to 85% in cost savings. And for a limited time, EU Startups listeners get $1,000 off Vanta. Just go to vanta.com/EU Startups without a dash to get started. So today I'm excited to welcome David Nothacker, the founder and CEO of Sennder, for an interview as part of the EU Startups podcast. Founded in 2015 and headquartered in Berlin, Sennder today is Europe's #1 digital freight forwarding platform for full truckloads. By linking large commercial shippers with small freight carriers through its in-house developed platform, Sennder provides a new level of automation, transparency, and efficiency to Europe's 300 billion road freight market. David, welcome to the EU Startups podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Thomas, for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
Awesome. So let's start at the very beginning. How did you and your co-founders come up with the idea for Sennder, and what is the mission of the company?
So I started working on the concept of Sennder during an MBA when I was in a group teamwork, and we had to solve a problem for the founder of BlaBlaCar, who came to class and asked us to identify business models that could complement the ride-sharing model that he was developing. This was 2014. I took that idea throughout the entire MBA, and after graduating in 2015, I managed to convince one of my classmates to execute on this perfect idea that we thought we had back then. And this is when I moved to Berlin with Nikki, my first co-founder. After almost a year of trying to find product market fit, or more specifically find the first paying customers, we realized that we had zero revenue and that our business model was clearly not as perfect as we thought when we were completing our MBA. And then, a pretty tricky phase of my life started. My first co-founder said he would leave the company. Then I almost lost an angel investor, but luckily at the end of 2016, things turned to the better. I refound an angel investor and two new co-founder, Nico and Julius, and with the two of them then pivoted into what Sennder is today. And I think you described it really well in your introduction.
Awesome. And did you always see yourself as an entrepreneur, or did the entrepreneurial spark just catch you at some point and Sennder was then your first venture?
It was my first real venture. I had a small startup in Switzerland where I grew up with my younger brother, delivering fruits and vegetables mostly to offices. But it was more of a toy startup. But I never really had the plan. At least I was not conscious about that. Now looking back and realizing that most of my family, my brothers and my parents all have a company or started a company, I realized that probably this is something that, my father, who is an entrepreneur, planted a seed that at a certain point then came out and pushed me into this direction.
Awesome. So starting companies is hard. What have been some of the biggest entrepreneurial challenges that you faced so far since starting Sennder, and how did you overcome them?
Founding a company is a bit like a roller coaster. You have moments where you think you're the coolest entrepreneur ever, and other moments that might follow that first moment a few minutes later, where you ask yourself, why the hell are you doing what you're doing? And I had these moments multiple times in, let's say, my founder career. And the first time I really had this was in 2015, when my first co-founder and I found an angel investor that was willing to invest a few $100,000 in our old business model. And after signing a term sheet, literally a few minutes later, so a few minutes after I thought I am the coolest entrepreneur in Berlin, he told me that he would be leaving Sennder. And he had good reasons, and I fully understood and supported that. But I also understood that with him leaving, and without sharing this news with the angel investor, we would also lose the investment and therefore would have to file for bankruptcy. And this was one of the toughest moments, where literally from one moment to another, the feelings went to the opposite. And just one example of this roller coaster that many entrepreneurs go through.
Okay, well, now we talked a bit about the downside and the risks, but Sennder was then able to raise over 250 million in funding, and you've been growing a very international team over the years. So what have been some of your proudest moments so far on this entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, also here, the highs are high, the lows are low, but a few highs that I probably will never forget. There are multiple ones. Maybe two I want to mention. The first one is when, after I think it was our Series B fundraise, my co-founders and I were quite exhausted, just wanted to get some rest because it's a long process, you probably know, and then got back to the office just to pick up a few things. And we walked up the staircase, and suddenly I was feeling that there was something going on. And when we walked into our, back then, office, we had the entire company waiting for us. And when we opened the door, there was a big round of applause. We were walking in, there was a big party music, and all recognizing. And this was one of those moments where the feelings were high across the company, that had a special meaning and therefore has a special place in my memory. And the second highlight is probably when we closed our last Sennder summer camp, where we invited all of our employees, 808 people, to spend a couple of days together to connect. And the, closing session and the energy, the emotions that I felt when closing the last summer camp were also truly special, and something that I will probably not forget.
Exciting. And so let's look a bit into the shipping and freight market. It's imperative to society as a whole. And what are the inherent challenges in that market at the moment or historically, and how does Sennder address those challenges?
Thomas, do you know what the most transported good on trucks is? Any idea?
I don't know. Gas? No, I don't know.
Almost. Very good. Yeah. Very close. It's air.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And an interesting fact is that 1/3, so every third truck that you see on the highway travels completely empty. So there's a lot of inefficiency, a lot of waste in this industry. And I think this one fact shows the opportunity that we have in front of us. Data, technology can solve a lot of these inefficiencies. For example, reduce empty kilometers, to reduce the transportation of this air, this empty legs. Data can help us also from a pricing perspective, identify what is the right match. But this is just a few of the highlights that we're already able to execute on today. But when we look at the future of this industry, I'm even more excited because there's a lot of change that will happen and that will require a lot of big players to fundamentally reinvent their business model. Let me quickly share with you an example of what I mean with this. If you join me quickly on a time machine and come with me into a future where autonomous trucks can travel from warehouse to warehouse, passing by schools with more kids. It doesn't matter whether you think it's in 20, 30, 40 years. But in this future, something very interesting will happen. Today, 70% of all trucks are owned by companies with fewer than 10 trucks. I want to repeat that. 70% of all the trucks that you see on the highway belong to very small companies. And in the future that I just described, these companies might lose their reason to exist. Why? Because they won't be able to buy a truck. The property of an autonomous truck will stay either with the manufacturer or the operator. Imagine if the truck has an accident, definitely not the small family-owned trucking company that is responsible. Secondly, these small trucking companies won't have to hire and manage a driver, the biggest value add today. And thirdly, they won't be able to optimize cost. It's a high-tech electrical machine, and changing oil at your neighbor shop to save some money is not any longer possible. So the 70, potentially even 80% of the market, these small customers of truck manufacturers or a few other providers, will have to reinvent themselves and find a different role. But this also means that companies that manufacture trucks, such as Scania, one of our largest investors, have to fundamentally reinvent the business model, because in that future, they most likely will have different customers and have a different monetization model than the one they have today. And while this future of autonomous trucks might look very far and down the road, some of this change is already happening today. Electric trucks are hitting the road this year, and next year we're going to see a major pickup of also electric trucks. And if you know that electric trucks cost 4 to 5 times as much as a diesel truck, 5 times more than a traditional truck. And you know that 70% of the trucks are owned by small companies with fewer than 10 trucks. Then you might ask yourself, why would a small company with 4 or 5 trucks buy a fifth or sixth one that costs more than an entire fleet without knowing what is the residual value? What is the true operating cost of such a new truck? And is anyone paying a premium for me driving green? And this is already today, I'm taking now truck manufacturers, one example, a first step towards a new business model that they have to invent, potentially going more into the pay-per-use rather than selling or leasing. And this is transformation, this change is already happening today. And this is something that I think is super exciting. I think that Sennder and I, as an individual, an employee of Sennder, can really shape how this transformation will come along.
Exciting. Okay, so many changes and many opportunities are to come in that market. That sounds very interesting. And let's switch back a bit to the entrepreneurial mindset. And we have many first-time founders and aspiring founders who are listening to this podcast. And do you have some top tips in mind, some pieces of startup advice that you can give to young entrepreneurs and for achieving startup success? Like what has helped you on your journey?
Maybe 2 tips. The first one is around finding product market fit, finding a product, a solution, a service that someone really needs and is willing to pay for is probably one of the most difficult parts in being an entrepreneur. And to get there, to find this product market fit, and this is actually the one thing maybe in the future that I'm a bit afraid of if I would start another company, to really go through that painful process. But one way to reduce the risk of failing is to openly discuss what your product is, what your service is, get feedback, interact as quickly as possible with potential customers of your service. I started doing some angel investing, and I still hear from a lot of founders that pitch to me or the first time I meet them, that they cannot disclose fully what they're working on, or they feel uncomfortable sharing certain type of information related to what they're building, the product they're building. Mm-hmm. And when I hear this, I quickly realize that they will struggle much more to find this product market fit. So my advice to the entrepreneurs listening to this podcast is try to get as much feedback as quickly as possible from whoever you can, ideally your potential customers. And I didn't listen. That's why when I started Sennder 1.0, after 1 year, we still had 0 customers. We thought that the initial idea was the right one and didn't change it and evolve it quickly enough based on the feedback we were receiving. The second maybe piece of advice and a learning that I would like to share is that when you find product market fit and when you start scaling your organization, adding people to the organization, you add a lot of complexity, especially when you double the size of the organization. And when that happens, you have to redesign the org structure, meaning that the bigger you get, the more focused teams have to get, the more focused responsibility leaders have to have. And from my experience, it's always painful to go through this because it means change for a lot of people that you care about, that work side to side with you, that suddenly have maybe less responsibility or more focused responsibility. And going through that change is extremely painful as well. So my piece of advice, be aware that this change will come. Try to give C-level titles immediately too quickly, as maybe you always have to for the next phase of growth. When you double organization, have to hire someone more senior, and be prepared to address also these organizational changes. This is also something I completely underestimated and completely undervalued in terms of what it meant. Every time I went through such a change, I thought, okay, now this is the last time, at least for the next few years. And then 6-12 months later, again, having to redefine some parts of the org structure, having to talk to some of my colleagues and friends that maybe they're not any longer the right individual for that role, and potentially having to take over a different role, more focused role. And this is something that I wish I knew that was going to be quite painful and so repetitive as we scale the organization.
Makes sense. Let's maybe stay with the topic of team and people for a moment, because I think it's a very important one. How do you make sure to keep your fast-growing international team always informed and motivated and up to date? Are there any manager traits that you learned along the way and that helped you in scaling the team? How do you approach team culture and team motivation at Sennder?
Also another very good question, Thomas. I think that keeping the DNA and keeping the foundation of your culture as you scale is a huge challenge. And also is one of the things I was most afraid of 3 years ago when we started scaling the organization from back then, more or less 100 people to now 1,000 people. And there are a couple of things that I believe work pretty well for Sennder that I would like to share. First thing that works really well is how you welcome and onboard new employees. At Sennder, we have what we call a Sennder Academy, which is a 1-week onboarding program where every employee goes through a standard process. Doesn't sound fun, but it's a lot of fun because you learn everything from the founding story to how our product really works, with the product demo, with the ability to test it, try it, to understanding why we have to find certain values, what the behaviors are, how we live them. And this also allows people that are part of this monthly training academy to already start building a community across the offices and start building that connection beyond the team they will be working on. A second thing I'm very proud of, and I already mentioned that earlier, is our Sennder summer camp. We did this now for 5 years. We skipped 1 year because of Corona, where we bring everyone from the 11 offices that we have together in one place for a couple of days. And I think this is extremely important, not only to talk about strategy, define the priorities, and also have discussions on compromises, but also really to build this culture, to understand that each and everyone within Sennder is part of a big team, something bigger, and having everyone together to connect and live our values is extremely powerful to keep this one identity that always has different flavors. Our Spanish colleagues have a different, let's say, way of living some values than maybe our Polish colleagues, but the fundamentals, the DNA, the building blocks of our culture, our values are the same. And with these two ways, I think we've done a pretty good job in keeping the company based on a clear DNA that we have developed or defined many years ago and developed over the years.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, one quick follow-up question there regarding how and where to work. I mean, during COVID, you just mentioned it, everyone was starting to work differently, and there was not happening a lot in offices in person. Now it goes a bit more back to in-person interactions. What is Sennder's approach there when it comes to flexible and remote work setups?
We had many discussions within Sennder exactly on this topic. And one thing I learned before giving you the answer how we live it is that it's a bit like a religion. Yeah? If you believe in one type of approach, it's very difficult to get behind a slightly different approach or a different approach to working. At Sennder, we value very much this human connection, this human exchange. That's why we do the academy. That's why we do the summer camp. And this is why for us, it's extremely important to keep living that. So our standard work policy is 3 days in the office and 2 remote. We, of course, have certain groups of employees that either travel a lot or need a little bit of more quietness, that have more flexibility. But we said that 3 days in an office is extremely important to continue to live our culture and develop our culture. The one fear I have with a fully remote setup is that when you miss this human connection, especially when you're 1,000 people or more, working for a company becomes something that is more transactional and less emotional. At the end of the day, I think someone works, including myself, for 3 reasons. The 3 main reasons why one works for a company. One is the vision, mission, and the impact. And I would say a lot of scale-ups and tech startups are able to highlight that very clearly. The second big reason why a person works for a company is the team that they work with. Yeah, this human connection, the fun, having the sense of belonging to something. And the third reason is working for a manager, typically a boss, from who you can learn and develop, grow professionally. And I think all of these, especially the second 2, are things that if you're in a fully remote setup and have no human interaction, is something that is very difficult to build. It's you potentially get into a position where you don't have an attachment to your team, an attachment to your boss, and then you could potentially just close the computer of one employer and open the computer of another employer the following day, and continue to do exactly the same without feeling any difference. And this is why we said at Sennder, we embrace remote work, which works. And if you would have asked me 3 or 4 years ago, well, would have probably given you a different answer than today. It works to work remotely. But if you want to build the culture that we have developed here, keep building the culture, living the culture that we've built here at Sennder, we believe that for a majority of our employees, it's best to come together and connect a couple of days per week to really live our culture, learn from each other, and engage with each other, and develop this sense of belonging.
Makes sense. Okay, David. So as a final question, I would like to ask you, I assume that some of our listeners would be interested in joining the Sennder journey and to become part of your team somehow. So I would be curious, like in which areas are you planning to hire strongly in the near future, and what is the best way for potential candidates to reach out to Sennder and to apply?
Absolutely. So we're hiring across all the 11 offices in, I would say, almost all the different business areas that we have. A focus is still very much on the tech, which for us includes the product manager side, the data engineering side, and the more engineering side. So here we are hiring everywhere, also in Barcelona, for example, where we have a tech hub, where we also have engineers placed. That's one area. Second area that is very dear to me is looking for some rockstar founder associates, so individuals that would work in my team in a daily exchange with me, working on the things that keep me busy every single day, from managing investors to special projects such as the summer camp, which is something that I also lead. And here we still have a few positions open as well. If anyone is interested in learning more about Sennder and the positions that we have open, I would recommend to check our website, sennder.com/careers. We have a nice short video that shows you a little bit not only how much we love orange as a color, but also how it feels like joining the Sennder team. And then you have a link to all the open positions where you can see what potentially fits for you. On our website and also on YouTube, we also interviewed a number of different people, I think around 15, 20 people from different offices in different parts of the organization, sharing a little bit how it is working in that position and working for Sennder. So if someone is really eager to go more into detail, and if you're really exploring the opportunity of Sennder, I would recommend to do that. Check out some of this content. It will help you better understand whether there is a good match.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David, for your time. It was interesting to learn more about Sennder and your entrepreneurial journey. At EU Startups, we'll definitely continue to follow what you guys and girls are building there. It's super exciting. A European scale-up with global potential. So congratulations on the success so far, and let's catch up soon.
Thank you so much, and speak to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.